They called it a lone gunman. They called it a tragedy. But what if it was a message? What if John F. Kennedy wasn't just assassinated? What if he was removed by a system designed to preserve itself? In this episode, we go beyond the bullet. We trace the convergence of power, organized crime, intelligence agencies, arms dealers, and shadow governments, and show how the modern deep state was born, with a rifle in Dallas. This is the story they never wanted you to hear.
Shh, no one's listening.
The term deep state might sound modern, but its roots were planted after World War II. When the war ended, America didn't just win, it inherited an empire of intelligence, science, and Black Ops infrastructure from the Nazis themselves. Operation Paperclip, back in 1945, came first. It secretly brought more than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and intelligence experts, some of them former Nazis, into the US government, primarily working in aerospace and military research. This formed the backbone of America's rocket and surveillance technology. 2 years later, the National Security Act of 1947 was passed by Congress and signed into law by President Harry S. Truman. It established the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Security Council, and reorganized military command under the newly formed Department of Defense. The goal was to consolidate American power in a post-war world, especially to counter Soviet influence. But what it created was a permanent intelligence bureaucracy, with virtually no oversight. The CIA was designed to operate outside traditional checks and balances. Its activities, covert operations, propaganda, foreign influence, were shielded from congressional and judicial review. Even presidents were often briefed selectively. Truman himself later expressed regret, writing that the CIA had become an operational and at times a policy-making arm of the government. So how did it pass? Fear. Fear of communism. Fear of losing global dominance. In that climate, secrecy became the price of security. So then, how did the CIA, America's elite spy agency, end up in bed with the mob? How could an organization that was designed to operate outside the traditional checks and balances work with criminals instead of just getting rid of them? The answer is simple: shared enemies and shared opportunities. The CIA, although operating outside normal parameters of the government, still needed someone to do the work that was too dirty for even them, and the mafia was able to move even quieter than they were. Fast forward a few years, and the CIA wanted Fidel Castro dead out of fear of the Soviets. So did the mob for shutting down their casinos in Havana and seized billions in underworld revenue. The CIA needed covert assets, untraceable operatives with experience in assassination, extortion, and smuggling. And the mob had them. Both feared Soviet influence, both saw Cuba as critical, and both were willing to operate outside the law. They worked together in assassination plots, drug trafficking, and covert operations. This isn't speculation. It's in declassified documents like the CIA Inspector General Report on Plots to Assassinate Fidel Castro, declassified in the late 1990s. The Church Committee reports from 1975 to 76, which confirmed CIA Mafia collaboration, and the Family Jewels report from 2007, detailing abuses and illegal CIA activities. Now let's talk about the mobsters who got tangled up with politicians. Sam Giancana from the Chicago outfit helped coordinate those wild Castro plots with the CIA. Then there's Johnny Roselli, moving between Las Vegas and Miami, acting as a go-between for the mob and the CIA. And Carlos Marcello, out of New Orleans. Some folks believe he may have orchestrated President Kennedy's murder after Robert Kennedy put the heat on him. On the political side, you've got Thomas D'Alessandro Jr., who, by the way, is Nancy Pelosi's father. He was allegedly connected to Baltimore crime boss Benny Trotta Magliano. FBI files suggested he had some, questionable ties during his time as a U.S. congressman and when he was mayor of Baltimore. Fred Roti, a Chicago alderman and a made member of the outfit, ended up convicted of racketeering and extortion. Pat Marcy worked behind the scenes in Illinois politics, supposedly pulling the strings on elections and legislation for the mob. And John C. Montana, a Buffalo City councilman and high-ranking member of the Magadino crime family, got outed at that infamous Appalachian meeting back in 1957. This fusion of crime and government laid the foundation for a power structure that reached way beyond the law and accountability. JFK didn't just disrupt power, he threatened its very survival. Here's what happened. Kennedy refused a full-scale invasion during the Bay of Pigs back in April of 1961. That decision, well, it absolutely enraged both the CIA and the Cuban exile backers. Then, in November of that same year, he fired CIA Director Allen Dulles. That move removed a real kingmaker, a symbol of the so-called deep state. He didn't stop there. He went on to pursue secret diplomacy with Khrushchev in 1962, which, honestly, undermined those Cold War hawks who just thrived on confrontation. During the Cuban Missile Crisis in October of that year, he managed to defuse the whole thing, negotiated peace, and even agreed in secret to remove US missiles from Turkey. And he pushed back against Israel's nuclear ambitions between 1962 and 63, really tried to stop their government from getting atomic weapons. He also threatened the whole military-industrial complex, pushing for troop withdrawals from Vietnam and criticizing defense spending. And let's not forget, he declared war on organized crime. Through his brother, RFK, he launched aggressive investigations that went right after mob leadership. Now, which act was the final straw? For the CIA, it was probably the firing of Dulles and Kennedy's vow to dismantle the agency. As for the mob, well, it was RFK's relentless prosecutions. They blamed all of that on JFK. The convergence of all these betrayals, it made Kennedy a liability, one that in their eyes just had to be removed. The Bay of Pigs was supposed to be a flawless covert op. Instead, it was a disaster, and some folks believe it was designed to fail from the start. The CIA expected JFK to commit air support after the invasion began. They figured once blood was shed, he'd have no choice but to escalate. Now, JFK did approve one airstrike to destroy Cuban aircraft, Operation Zapata, but he refused a second, broader air campaign. He saw through the trap. He didn't want another Korea, or honestly, something even worse, like a nuclear confrontation with the Soviets. Cuban intelligence, with Soviet help, had already caught wind of the operation. Castro knew the exact beaches the exiles would land on. The invasion force was small, poorly supported, and easily defeated. How close were we to World War III? If JFK had authorized more airstrikes, Soviet forces may have responded. Soviet submarines were already near Cuba. It could have triggered a regional or even a global war. The failure of the operation humiliated JFK publicly, but internally, it enraged the CIA and the exiles. In this context, Lee Harvey Oswald would emerge as a strange, shadowy figure, defected to the USSR, then allowed to return with no charges. But we will talk more about this in the next episode. For now, just know that many believe Oswald was a cutout, used to muddy the waters, then abandoned. JFK was assassinated in November of 1963. Within just a few hours, power shifted. Lyndon B. Johnson, a man with deep ties to Texas oil, political machines, and the military establishment, took the oath of office. Once in, he immediately escalated the Vietnam War, restored CIA access and funding, abandoned peace talks, reaffirmed ties with Israel. Everything JFK had tried to unravel, Johnson reinforced. Then came the Warren Commission. LBJ appointed Allen Dulles, the very man JFK had fired, to help lead it. The commission ignored countless leads, no mention of CIA mafia ties, testimonies ignored or altered. Witnesses later died under mysterious circumstances. Instead, the report gave us one answer. Oswald acted alone, files were sealed, investigations buried, the cover-up was as surgical as the hit, and the deep state? It was no longer hidden, it was entrenched. JFK's assassination wasn't just about one man, it was about control and a prefect storm. The mob, the CIA, the military-industrial complex, and political operators had merged into a new kind of power. one that didn't need elections, one that didn't answer to the Constitution. We call it the deep state, and it began with a gunshot in Dallas. In the next episode, we'll look at what actually happened on that motorcade in Dallas, explore all the theories and how it led Robert F. Kennedy to follow the same path and ultimately meet the same fate.
Shh. No one's listening. Like and subscribe.